My name is John, and my life was quite ordinary. Every morning I would wake up next to my wife Sarah, have breakfast, kiss her goodbye, and head to work at the office. My position as a sales manager didn't involve many surprises: calls, meetings, reports, routine. After work I would return home, Sarah and I would have dinner discussing the day, and then settle in front of the TV or each do our own thing. On weekends we would go shopping, to the movies, or visit parents. In general, nothing unusual. But one day our usual routine was disrupted. Sarah and I were planning to go to the theater to see a talked-about play about love. I wasn't particularly interested in theater, but my wife really wanted to see this performance, so I agreed to keep her company. Imagine my surprise when an hour before leaving, Sarah suddenly started getting ready to go. "I'm sorry, honey, the bosses are calling. An urgent business trip to the neighboring city, you understand?" She smiled guiltily, hastily putting on her jacket. "But what about the theater? What about our evening?" I was confused. "Listen, I have an idea. Go with my mom so the ticket doesn't go to waste. You love her. You'll have something to talk about." I gritted my teeth, holding back my annoyance. This definitely wasn't the date I was counting on. On the other hand, Linda is a sweet woman. We've always gotten along well. Why not? "Okay, I'll call her. Have a good trip, sunshine." I sighed, pecking Sarah on the cheek. Left alone, I dialed my mother-in-law's number. Linda was delighted by the invitation. Said she would be ready in half an hour. Well, the evening promised to be interesting. Linda and I awkwardly settled into the velvet chairs in the stalls. I stealthily examined my mother-in-law, an elegant suit, artful makeup, styled hair. I had to admit, she looked stunning for her age. The lights went down, the curtain rose, and we were immersed in a lifelong love story. On stage unfolded a touching drama about two people who carried their feelings through years and trials. Fate brought them together and separated them, but they always found their way back to each other. I was surprised to find myself captivated by the plot. Before, I thought all these love plays were just sentimental drivel. But this story touched some strings in me, awakened long-forgotten dreams and desires. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Linda wiping away a stray tear. It seems the performance made an impression on her too. When in the final scene, the aged lovers, having gone through all the hardships, embraced each other, there was a unanimous sigh in the hall. It was as if we had all lived a whole life together with the characters, imbued with their joys and sorrows. Linda and I left the theater in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. We got into the car and drove home in silence. I felt a vague excitement, as if the play had stirred something long forgotten in me. That was so touching and true to life, wasn't it? Linda suddenly broke the silence. To love, to wait, to hope for so many years? Yes, it's a powerful story, not something you see every day, I nodded. Even me, a callous, cynical man, was moved to the core. Linda laughed softly and covered my hand with hers. That touch was like an electric shock running through my body. "You're not callous, John. You're very sensitive and attentive. Sarah is so lucky to have you." A lump suddenly formed in my throat. I looked away, trying to hide my embarrassment. For some reason, my mother-in-law's words made me feel awkward and bitter. Maybe because I didn't feel sensitive or attentive myself. Just an ordinary guy, nothing outstanding. At home, I invited Linda to come in, have a glass of wine. I didn't want to part ways like this right away, to interrupt this strange, poignant aftertaste of the play. And it seemed that my mother-in-law felt the same way. Pouring red wine into glasses, I settled on the sofa in the living room with Linda. For a while we silently sipped the tart drink, immersed in our thoughts. And then my mother-in-law suddenly began to speak quietly. "You know, John, this play reminded me of my youth. I, too, once loved, waited, hoped." I nearly choked on my wine in surprise. Never before had Linda confided in me about personal matters. And in general, she rarely talked about her past. "Really? And what happened?" I asked cautiously. My mother-in-law smiled sadly and swirled the glass in her hand, watching the play of light in the facets of the crystal. "What usually happens? Life, routine, obligations. Once I dreamed of a great love, but in the end, I married a good but estranged man. I gave birth to a daughter, immersed myself in the family routine, and somehow forgot who I was and what I dreamed of." Her words suddenly made me feel uneasy. Too much in this story reminded me of my own life. I, too, once wanted more, also believed that adventures and passions awaited me. And what's the result? But you were happy, weren't you? You have a wonderful daughter, a loving family. Isn't that the main thing? I tried to cheer up my mother-in-law, although I myself felt a bitterness rising in my soul. Linda smiled sadly and looked into my eyes, so intently, as if trying to look into the very depths. I'm not complaining, John. I really have everything that many people dream of. But sometimes I so miss that craziness, that thrill that I experienced in my youth. To feel that you are really alive, not just existing. Her words resonated in me with frightening force. I suddenly realized with complete clarity, I also lacked this: passion, risk, a sense of fullness of life. Everything I had been living for the last few years was just a pale shadow of what I once dreamed of. Yes, I understand what you mean, I said slowly, looking at Linda. I often think myself, where did that explosive guy that I used to be go? I guess I got old, settled down, became boring. You? Boring? Don't make me laugh. My mother-in-law snorted and lightly pushed me on the shoulder. You're the most interesting man I know. There's always something to talk about with you. You're smart, ironic, charming. Her compliments made my cheeks flush. It felt damn good. Even too good. It wasn't the first time we had a heart-to-heart conversation, but today there was some new exciting tension in the air. Too personal, too intimate. And judging by the way Linda's eyes were burning, she felt it too. A couple more glasses of wine, and our conversation became more and more frank. We reminisced about our youth, shared our innermost dreams and regrets. We laughed, teased each other, argued. My heart skipped a beat every now and then when Linda, in a rush of emotion, grabbed my hand or leaned close, tickling my ear with her breath. At some point, I caught myself thinking that I wanted her, right up to the ringing in my ears, to the colic in my stomach. And it wasn't just the alcohol, although it played a role too. No, it was all about this conversation, about the bared souls, about the painful sincerity. I think Linda guessed my thoughts. She suddenly fell silent in mid-sentence and just looked at me, long, searchingly, and then quietly asked, "John, tell me, do you want me? Be honest." Her question made my mouth go dry. For a few moments I frantically searched for words, trying to cope with the feelings that overwhelmed me. "Linda, listen, we shouldn't, this is wrong," I finally blurted out. But my mother-in-law was no longer listening. Resolutely setting aside her glass, she moved right up to me and whispered right into my lips, "To hell with shouldn't. I'm tired of being right. I want to be crazy, reckless for once in my life. With you." Then everything rushed by in a haze. Hot kisses, clothes torn off onto the floor, feverish caresses. I think we were knocking things over, but we didn't even notice. All that mattered was this all-consuming passion, like a nuclear explosion. We made love furiously, frenziedly, as if for the last time. We bit, scratched, pressed into each other until it hurt. We didn't even try to hold back the moans, groans, screams. It's a good thing the neighbors weren't home. The climax was so strong that for a few seconds I stopped thinking altogether, completely dissolved in the blinding pleasure. And then we just lay there, our bodies intertwined, wet with sweat, and tried to catch our breath to realize what we had done. The blissful languor was gradually replaced by anxiety, shame, confusion. My God, what have we done? I woke up to the insistent beeping of the alarm clock. With difficulty opening my puffy eyes, I didn't immediately realize where I was. The sofa in the living room, crumpled pillows, some rags on the floor. And next to me was a disheveled, sleepy Linda. For a moment I just looked at her, trying to understand if yesterday's madness was a dream. But no, judging by the hickeys on my neck and the sharp ache all over my body, it had really happened. I felt sick with horror and disgust with myself. What have I done, you idiot? How could I give in to this eclipse? Fall for a cheap temptation? Lord, we're relatives, close people. How can I live with this burden of guilt now? Panic was washing over me in an icy wave. I have to end this right now. Pretend it never happened. Beg Linda to forget. Never bring it up again. "Good morning," a quiet voice suddenly said. I flinched and looked at my mother-in-law. She was looking at me with a slight sadness, but without a hint of embarrassment. It seemed that what had happened was not such a surprise to her. "Linda, listen. What happened last night was a terrible mistake. We shouldn't have—" "I shouldn't have," I said feverishly, crumpling the sheet in my hands. "Let's just forget it, okay? Pretend it never happened." My mother-in-law sighed and shook her head. She sat up, covering herself with the blanket, and looked thoughtfully into the distance. "No, John, I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. Because for me, it's not a mistake," she said quietly but firmly. "I wanted this. I wanted you. And I don't regret anything." For a moment I was speechless. How can she talk about it so calmly? Is it really normal for her to sleep with her own daughter's husband? "But Linda, what about Sarah? What about our family?" I almost groaned, clutching my head in my hands. I can't do this to her. It's wrong." My mother-in-law was silent for a long time, fiddling with the edge of the blanket, and then she suddenly leaned forward, looking into my eyes. "John, honey, believe me, I understand your feelings, and I certainly don't want to destroy your marriage," she began gently. "But understand me too. For the first time in many years, I felt alive, desired, happy. You gave me an incredible night, made me remember that I am a woman. Don't I have the right to this happiness?" Her words cut painfully at my heart. There was some truth in them, some desperate message. But I knew that if I gave in to temptation once more, we would go down a slippery slope, lying, scheming, betraying. It can't be like this. "Linda, please, I'm begging you. Let's stop before it's too late," I pleaded, taking her hand. "What happened between us is magical, no question. But the magic has dissipated. It's time for us to return to the real world." A bitter spasm ran across my mother-in-law's face. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, as if trying to hold back unwanted tears, but then she resolutely nodded and pulled away. "You're right, John. It was a dream, a fairy tale for one night. We can't destroy your family for the sake of a fleeting whim," she said hollowly, and began to get dressed. "I'm going home, and you do what you think is right. You can tell Sarah, you can keep quiet. I will accept any decision you make." I had never seen her so lost and dejected. My heart ached with tenderness and guilt. How I wanted to comfort her, hold her close, promise that everything would be all right. But I had no right to do that, not after everything that had happened between us. So I just nodded silently and turned away, giving her a chance to collect herself. When the door slammed behind Linda, I was momentarily seized by regret, as if I had missed something very important, something destined by fate. But I tried to shake off this delusion. I have a duty to my family, and I will fulfill it, no matter what it costs me. The next few weeks blurred into one endless Groundhog Day. Work, home, smiles, kisses, dinners, everything as before. I diligently pretended that nothing had changed, that I was still an exemplary husband and son-in-law. Only at night, lying sleepless next to the snoring Sarah, I replayed that fateful night over and over in my head. I remembered Linda's feverish whisper, the heat of her body, the sweet taste of her lips, and I hated myself for not being able to erase it from my memory. My mother-in-law did everything to make us meet less often. She almost stopped visiting, citing busyness and poor health. When we did meet at family celebrations, she behaved pointedly, politely, and distantly. Only her eyes gave her away, extinguished, sickly, full of longing. It was physically painful for me to look at her, both from guilt and from poorly concealed desire. Each time I barely restrained myself from scooping her up in my arms and kissing her senseless. Once Sarah even noticed our tension and teased, "Hey, why are you two so gloomy? Did you have a fight over politics or something?" Linda and I laughed forcedly and assured that everything was fine. We were just tired and worried about work. I think Sarah believed it, or pretended to believe it. But my wife's suspicions made me pull myself together. This can't go on. We have to end this. Finally and irrevocably erase Linda from my heart, from my memory. Otherwise, sooner or later, I'll break down, and something irreparable will happen. So I threw myself into work and family with tripled zeal. I took on extra projects, stayed late. I gave all my free time to Sarah, took her to restaurants, arranged romantic evenings, surprised her. She glowed with happiness, blossoming before my eyes, whispered how much she loved me. And I smiled with effort, nodded distractedly, said, "Yes, dear, I love you too." And I knew I was lying. To herself, to myself. Because in my soul I still longed for the forbidden, the painfully sweet. One day, returning from a corporate party in a cab, I gave in to weakness. I asked the driver to take me to Linda's house. For a long time I sat in the dark interior, staring at the lonely window where a light was on, imagining how I would go up now, ring the doorbell. I would grab the stunned mother-in-law in an embrace, slam her against the wall with a greedy kiss. I would tear off her clothes, throw her on the bed, and I would love her furiously, frenziedly, to exhaustion. The obsession was so strong that I almost did it for real. I even reached for the door handle. But at the last moment I came to my senses and hoarsely threw to the driver, "Let's get out of here." That night I got drunk to unconsciousness for the first time. I sat in the kitchen guzzling whiskey straight from the bottle and sobbing silently, biting my fists. That's how Sarah found me in the morning, disheveled, wet with tears and booze. Of course she threw a fit. She yelled, called me names, threatened to go to her mother's. Through the alcoholic haze, I had time to think, this is my chance. Tell everything, destroy our marriage in one fell swoop, free myself from the burden of lies and secrets. But my tongue seemed to stick to the roof of my mouth. I mumbled some ridiculous excuses about stress at work, fatigue, a nervous breakdown. And I saw how the irritation in Sarah's eyes was replaced by contempt and pity. In the end, she stayed. Even took me by the hand to the bedroom, put me to bed. Brought a glass of water and a couple of aspirin tablets. True, she walked around sulking for a couple of days, showing with all her appearance what a non-entity I was. From that day on, I made a vow to myself, to bury my feelings for Linda as deep as I could, to become the perfect husband, to regain Sarah's trust and love. After all, that's what manly valor is all about, the ability to keep one's word, to remain faithful. And for a while it even worked. In public, my mother-in-law and I were impeccable, two strangers, connected only by kinship and polite affection. No one even thought about the storm of passions that once raged between us. But as soon as we were left alone for even a moment, it all started anew. Stealthy glances, accidental touches, ambiguous phrases. We were drawn to each other like starving beasts, forgetting about caution. A couple of times we were almost caught. Once at a family gathering, taking advantage of everyone's preoccupation, we hid in a closet and started kissing like crazy. And only the creak of the door a second before Sarah entered brought us back to reality. My heart was pounding like mad while my wife looked at our flushed faces in surprise. Luckily, Linda had the wit to improvise, saying she was getting pickles from the top shelf and I was helping her. It seems to have worked. But we both understood. This couldn't go on forever. One day, luck would turn away from us, and then a storm would break out, a scandal would erupt, shreds would fly in all directions. Sarah would leave, slamming the door, or even file for divorce, and it would serve us right, the ungrateful bastards. After another wake-up call, Linda and I decided something had to change. We couldn't go on like this. We were walking on the edge of a knife, but we couldn't be apart either. As soon as we parted for even a short time, everything inside writhed in pain, howling with longing, and so we began to carve out rare hours for meetings. We took time off, made excuses for business. We rented rooms in cheap motels on the outskirts of town, indulging in love there like obsessed. It was sheer madness, Russian roulette, but we didn't care anymore, anything to prolong our sinful, tormenting affair. Sarah suspected something. I could see it in her prickly, scrutinizing gaze, but she remained silent, didn't make scenes. Maybe she was afraid to learn the truth. Maybe she wasn't without sin herself. I don't know. I didn't care much anymore. My world narrowed down to one single person, the beautiful, vicious Linda. My personal nemesis and Eurydice and Juliet all rolled into one. I hated her and worshipped her, ran from her and yearned for her. And I realized that's how it would always be. This is the meaning of my life from now on, to balance on the edge, to maneuver between duty and passion, to lie to my loved ones, to squirm, to steal minutes of forbidden happiness, and in between, to play the role of an exemplary family man, a loving husband. Many would probably say, this is a road to nowhere, a dead end with no way out, and they would be right. But do I have a choice? How can I give up the one who has become the essence of my existence, the Alpha and Omega? So I accept my fate. I resign myself to the eternal curse, a secret that eats away at my soul. I know that I will never be completely honest with Sarah, or even with myself, and that one day it may all end in a way that is absolutely not in my favor. Did you like this story? Let us know in the comments what you liked. Subscribe to our storytelling podcast. Also, don't forget to like and ring the bell so you don't miss more interesting stories. See you soon.